I'm Mark Henick. This is So-Called Normal. Hi, welcome to So-Called Normal. My name is Mark Henick. Thanks for joining us. Today on the show, we have Michael Landsberg. He's the Canadian sports journalist, the former host of Off the Record on TSN, and incredible mental health advocate and his Sick Not Weak community. So Michael and I talk a lot about that. We talk a lot about advocacy and brain health and his own story. We talk about sickness and how it doesn't make you weak. That's one of the things that he's most passionate about. I also wanted to have him on the show today, in particular for this Bell Let's Talk Day special. Bell Let's Talk has been such an incredible initiative all across Canada, really all over the world. And if you follow me on Twitter or Facebook at Mark Henick, I'll flood your feed every single year with hashtag Bell Let's Talk information, as I am today too, very actively, because it's such a great opportunity to share with people information, and I like to share stats and quotes and facts and figures, but also stuff about my own story of struggle and recovery, and to get people talking. That's the whole point. You know, some people think that talking isn't acting. Well, no, talking is an action. That's how we break down stigma. And if you don't believe that stigma's still out there, if you don't believe that, or if you think that we've overcome stigma already, you just talk to some people outside of the mental health community. So it was fun to talk to Michael in particular about that, because he's been advocating for change for so long now, doing what I do too, sharing the story. So I thought of no better person for our Bell Let's Talk Day special than Michael Landsberg. So here he is. You know, I wanted to have you on here because you're probably one of the most prominent mental health advocates in Canada, probably worldwide in many respects. So tell me about yourself.
Well, I find it bizarre that you just said that. Not that you thought of that, but I'm listening to you say that. I'm going like, how the hell did that happen?
Right.
Really? I mean, like, what makes a good mental health advocate is someone who's been really mentally unhealthy, right?
Right.
I mean, I have no currency to trade in. I have no credibility except for one thing, that I understand depression and anxiety in a way that no one could possibly understand if they hadn't been through it.
Right.
So it's like all roads of my life lead me to you saying what you said before.
Yeah.
And that is, number one, I've been a broadcaster all my life. Really, all I've learned how to do is to talk. So that makes me suited to get up on stage or to get in front of a microphone or a camera and speak about it, right? You know, I'm a professional talker. Number two, I have platforms available to me because of my career, because of the places I've worked, because of the job I do, the company that I work for. And number three, I have the illness, which is the ultimate credibility. And number four, most importantly, I think, I have a willingness to share not just the surface, but the very bottom. I'm willing to go anywhere.
But you didn't always, right?
Yeah, you know, I never hesitated to talk about it. I never talked about it on television, for instance, because I thought there was no value to it. But it wasn't that I wasn't talking about it on Off the Record, for instance, for 10 years. Because I thought, well, I'm embarrassed or I'm ashamed. I just thought no one would care. Right. I had no idea that the stigma was as profound and as devastating as it is. So my belief was like, why would I talk about it? Like, what's the benefit? People just think, oh, you know what? We always thought he was arrogant. Now we think he's a whiner.
Right.
And then I found out almost by chance one day that there is a huge benefit to talking about your struggles with mental illness when you say it with strength, without weakness, without appearing embarrassed or ashamed, because you can empower others. When they hear you say that, they go, well, hey, wait a second here. He didn't seem ashamed, so maybe I shouldn't be ashamed.
Right. So when did that happen? What take us to that moment.
I can tell you the exact date. So 2008 and the last half of 2007 were terrible times for me. Really severe depression. Like on all depression rating scales, I was maxed out. And in, I guess it was November of 2008, I was in Montreal at the Grey Cup. We were shooting Off the Record there. And November 24th, Marriott Hotel, room 521 in Montreal, 4 a.m. in the morning. I'm sitting on the edge of the bed, and I remember thinking, I know why people take their lives, because I was in so much pain, and I was so devastated by the idea that I had to go through it all again the next day, that I was way more worried about that than I would have been about dying. And I learned a lot on that day. And fortunately for me, I wasn't really a risk to myself because I'd been through it before, right? So I had been on and off medication, for instance, 4 times. So I knew on the 5th time that there was a pretty good chance that medication would help me.
Right.
So I didn't feel that same sense of hopelessness that others do.
But
I still felt it.
That was going back how far, though, when you first got either diagnosed or medicated?
1998.
98, okay.
Yeah. So I'd had it for 10 years. I had successfully treated. And when I say successfully treated, I mean, that's a whole different area that you can ask me a question about. And I got lots of answers for it. I got lots of answers all the way, man. So you know what? You could actually just go grab a coffee and I'm just going to sit here and talk and anticipate the questions that you would have asked
I'll
me.
edit those in later.
Yeah, you edit. Well, Michael, how about 2009? So I really struggled. And then I went back from Montreal, started on medication. That was probably December 1st, 2008. Just a wreck. I'm a misery. I have no feeling of joy in my life at all. I wake up in the morning and I know no matter what happens that day, I will not experience joy because I've lost the ability to do it.
And did anybody around you?
Everybody knew.
Everybody. But
everybody
was it the type of thing that everybody knew because of your changes in behavior and your mood, or were you telling people?
I was telling people.
Yeah,
I was telling people. People at work. As a matter of fact, I just had a conversation yesterday with a woman who just left TSN. And she said, it was kind of like this sort of goodbye letter. I mean, I hope to keep in touch with her. But it's significant for me because when I went to the doctor back in 1998, when I told you that's when I was first diagnosed, and I started on Prozac, she was the first person that I saw when I got back to work. And I said, I'm going to do something now that I'm sure you've never seen anyone do before. But I'm so excited that I just started on medication because maybe I'm going to get better. Like I just felt like that's hope. That's what hope is. When you start something new, that means that tomorrow or 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now, you could be better. Right. That's hope. And I had that hope. And we still laugh at it, that was me. I was so excited. Not about, taking it. I didn't want to take the medication, right? But I certainly didn't want to keep living the way I was living. So 2009, after I'd been better for probably 8, 9, 10 months, Stéphane Richer is a guest on Off the Record, former Montreal Canadian. I had read this is how life works. Just by chance, I had read that he had suffered from depression in the 1990s. Just one paragraph in a story. And I was just reading these stories about him because he was a guest on the show. And I thought, that'll make an interesting question. I wasn't thinking to myself, well, I'm going to ask him, and that's going to change people's lives.
Sure.
I asked him to come out of the green room, and I said, Stéphane, you don't know me. You never met me before. You don't owe me anything. But if it's okay, I'd like to ask you how you're doing with your depression. Did you suffer from depression in the 90s? He goes, yeah. And he said, I don't know. It's very painful. And I said, okay, well, I'm not certainly don't want to cause you pain. And I certainly am not trying to, quote unquote, out you. But if you'll talk about it, I'll talk about it. And he said, well, what would you say? And I said, well, this is my story a little bit. And he said, let's do it. So we went on the air. It was maybe a minute, 90 seconds tops. I said, hey, Stéphane, before we go to break, tell me, back in the 1990s, you really struggled with depression. And he said some things that have stuck with me, that have shaped my view of mental illness and my way to describe it. He said, can you imagine? Canadian kid, born in Montreal, drafted by the Montreal Canadiens, rookie of the year in the NHL, last Montreal Canadian to score 50 goals. I win the Stanley Cup in Montreal. And all I can think about at that point is getting home and getting into bed and getting away from everyone. I never experienced a second of joy. And that whole idea of the inability to experience joy has stuck with me and defines how I see depression. Because here you have the greatest example possible. He won the Stanley Cup. So if circumstances can bring a depressed person joy, then how could that not have brought him joy? Clearly, it's not about your environment. When you're really sick, it's not about what goes on around you or what happens to you. It's about your illness, and your illness blocks out every possibility. So he said, I said, well, how you doing now? He goes, well, in 1995, after I won the Cup in New Jersey, 5 days later, I tried to kill myself. But I obviously didn't succeed. I went for help, and he said, I'm doing pretty good. Not great, but pretty good. He said, I enjoy my life. And again, I remember these words. This is like 9 years ago. And I remember him saying, but I enjoy my life. And I thought, wow, that's an amazing story. And this is what I said. I said, well, you know what? Me too, except for the Stanley Cup and all of that. I said, I felt exactly the same thing, this joyless existence. And like you, I'm doing better. Last year was terrible for me, but here I am. I'm doing okay. And that was it. So afterwards, I said, hey, thanks for doing that, man. I thought, it was really, really open and honest of you. And he said, oh, my pleasure. That was it, I thought, until the next day. Next day, I start getting emails, and they all say the same thing. They all say, hey, Michael, hearing you and Stéphane Richer talk about depression, it was the first time in my life I've seen two men talk about depression without shame and without embarrassment, and sure, without sounding weak. And because of that, I'm telling you something I've never told another human being. I've suffered, and it came from all kinds of different people. Either I've suffered for a year or 5 years. I remember one where a guy wrote, I've suffered from depression every day of my life. My dad suffered from depression every day of his life. He drank every day. We never saw him smile, but he thought men don't go for help. Men suck it up. And he gave up his life to his illness. And I've given up my life to the illness until I heard two guys talking about it going, well, shit. Those guys, they're not ashamed or embarrassed. Why should I be ashamed and embarrassed?
Well, especially for a TSN audience, right? A sports type audience.
That's the demographic for sure. Yeah. So that's kind of really why I'm here, because of that one day, that one reaction, and there's stories that come from that.
Sure. Well, in the 10 years since then, more than 10 years since then, how many of those stories do you think you've heard?
Many. Just walking in today, I was on the phone with somebody that I'd never spoken to who's suffering from pretty severe depression. And, I can play back in my mind what I was just saying to him because, because I know what it's like to be on the other end of the line. And that's what makes me or anybody else who's been through it an effective advocate and effective quote unquote friend to somebody with depression. I said to him, look, dude, you need to be around people that understand you. Being around one person that understands you is way more important than being 100 people around you that are just around you, right? And I said, and you need to be around people that won't judge you. You need to know that you're safe. And you need to know, most of all, that this person I'm talking to gets it. So I said, let me talk for a second and tell you what I think you're experiencing, and you tell me if I'm right. And I went through the loss of pain, or the loss of the ability to experience joy, hopelessness, this feeling of I'm all alone in this loss of self-esteem, all of these things. And he goes, oh man. Because it's kind of creepy. You're like in my head. And I go, we all feel the same thing. So I would say I've heard many, many, many stories because I throw myself out there and saying, hey, I'm the guy to talk to if you got no one to talk to.
Do you identify as somebody in recovery? Because you still struggle from time to time, right?
I still struggle. Usually I put marks on my arm. They kind of faded because I took a shower earlier. Like with permanent marker, I put a mark on my arm. When the month starts, I have no marks on my arm. And every time I have a bad day, I put a mark on my arm. And it's not particularly exact because now my bad days are more bad times. Like I'll have 3-4 really bad hours where I go from a guy with a bounce in his step to a guy who's kind of just slouching over and my feet are hardly picked up off the ground. And I go from a guy who goes, wow, I like being me, right? I like being me, to a guy who says, I don't like me at all. I don't want to be this person. Why do I have to be this person? And it's amazing how I change. And I try to mark this on my arm, not for me, but for other people who I speak to, who I can say, hey, you know what? I am one of you still. Just because I say I'm doing better doesn't mean that I'm fixed, because a lot of people don't get cured. Right. A lot of people find a way to live with it. And I have found that way.
Right. Well, I think that's in many ways what recovery is. Recovery doesn't mean cure. And I think the advocacy community knows this, but there's lots of different ways to recover. Sometimes it just means finding a new normal that incorporates your illness or whatever your experience is with it.
Well, that is, it's a very complicated thing that you just said, because there's so many dimensions to that. And one of them that I'm really aware of is that you can lose perception or understanding of what your normal is.
Right.
Because typically the kinds of illnesses that we're talking about, depression and anxiety, which is what I know, they don't hit you hard all of a sudden. Some people would experience that, but most people, it's these imperceptible, is that a word? Yeah. Well, you know what? Damn it. I'm going to use it no matter what. Imperceptible changes in you. These tiny changes to who you are that you don't notice, like on a daily basis. You don't go, wow, like I'm feeling a little tiny bit worse than I was yesterday. And now I'm retreating a tiny bit. And now I'm being less sociable and all of these things.
I'm a maritimer. I was born and raised in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. And I think like any maritime community, you know about boiling a lobster, how you have to put it in head first in the hot water, not put it in cold water first. Because otherwise it gets used to it and it suffers. It doesn't realize that the temperature is changing.
It's a great analogy. I got one. I'm not a maritimer. I'm a Toronto boy, but we have baths in Toronto. And when you get in a bath, although I'm not a bath guy, just put it on the record right now. I'm not a big fan of baths. But you go in a bath and it feels nice and warm. And you go, this is great. And then after 5 minutes, you go, it doesn't feel so warm anymore. But you didn't feel it changing. So these tiny changes happen to you, so tiny that you don't know that they're happening. And so you're what's normal for you changes every day. And
Right.
and if what's normal for you, if you could measure it on a scale, normal for me walking around, I'm an 8 out of 10. Well, when you go from an 8 out of 10 to an 7.99 to a 7.98, you can't notice those changes.
Right.
So by the time you get down to a 4, you're not even aware of what normal felt like anymore.
Right.
So you think this is me, right? This is like somehow my illness has deceived me. It's become so insidious.
Yeah, and there's a lot, I think, tied up in that too, because depression in particular, again, depression and anxiety is my experience as well, it lies to you, and it tells you these lies that you can't get better and that this is the way it's supposed to be. And the worst lie of all, of course, maybe you'll never escape it. Maybe you need to end your life.
Yeah.
Right? So then how did you overcome those lies? Did you learn to not trust your thoughts?
I think the first thing I was able to do was to take a step back. And this coincided with the start of Off the Record, too. So in a lot of ways, it should have been amazing time for me professionally, right? Here, I get a talk show. I get to meet this unbelievable cross-section of people, like literally like actors, actresses, obviously athletes, coaches, prime ministers, presidents, like I got to meet everybody. And yet I kept falling deeper into this hole. If you looked at the first year of Off the Record, I would tell you it was all an act. I was dying. So one day I'm going, wow, I just said no to my friend Bob asked me if I wanted to go to the Much Music Video Awards. I'm just making this up. I don't remember what it was. And I said no. And I wonder why I did that. And then I started to think, I've said a lot of no's lately. And a lot of times, when I have the opportunity to be around people, I kind of retreat. And so I kind of forensically investigated my own life over the previous 6-8 months. And I realized that I had totally changed. And it wasn't until I really examined it and looked back at all of my actions or lack of actions over that period of time, did I realize that I was a new person. And the person I was, I did not want to be. And the person I was, I did not like. But it took some real examination for me to figure that out. And after that, it was kind of easy, right? It's like, I'm sick, right? Like I didn't have to go to the doctor and say, Doc, I think there might be something wrong with me. I went to the doctor and said, Doc, I'm dying right now. And I'm really sick and I've changed. And the person I am, I don't want to be. I need you to help.
One of the biggest reasons that I wanted to have you on the show was from my vantage point, and actually you said it this way, very much on the biological approach to mental illness treatment. Yes. There is a whole other side, of course. It's the nature-nurture debate, right? Does it come from the brain and go outward, or does it come from outward and come into the brain? Most people tend to be somewhere in the middle, that it's a little bit of both, that your environment physically changes your brain changes how you interact with the environment. So you eventually did find a medical treatment that worked for you, right? A medication of some kind. Yeah. What about on the other side? They call it doing the work in psychology. Have you gone into therapy? Have you analyzed what some of the other stuff is?
I did at the time when I first started seeing a psychiatrist. When I first went, I said, look, you tell me what you want me to do. If you say, if you're the right person for me to talk to, I'll come back, whenever you want me to come back. If you say it's twice a week, I'll come back twice a week. If you say it's 5 times a week, I'll come back 5 times a week, whatever it is. But I need something right now. And so I started on Prozac. And I also went back and we talked. I mean, it was maybe once a week, and then it was once every 2 weeks. Sure. And sure, it was helpful, but I believe that it was more helpful for me in other areas than it was in my depression. I believe that she helped me understand myself better and understand aspects of my life and my ability to influence those things around me. So it was good. But I don't believe that it had any impact whatsoever on my depression.
Right. Now, do you notice that there are triggers for your bad hours now, or bad days, bad periods?
I've never really, I wish I could, right? It's like, well, I get terrible migraines, but it's only when I eat cheddar cheese. Right. Well, that's pretty easy to avoid cheddar cheese, right? So it'd be great if I ever figured it out. I haven't figured out a single trigger except for anxiety. So it's like anxiety is this bully that comes after me and pushes me into a ring with 10 other bullies. So the anxiety is not the end point for me. The anxiety is the vaulting off into depression. And when I say anxiety, I'm not anxious at all about my career. Never once have I thought, you know what? I'm feeling pressure from my job. Never once, not one show, nothing like that. It's mostly from having kids and worrying about my kids. And my daughter was diagnosed with a chronic eye condition when she was 3.5. And I obsessed about it. I still do. I'm always kind of going, okay, well, is there bad news coming now? When my son goes to the doctor, I don't worry about him, right? It's because I haven't been programmed to fear the worst. But I know with Casey, my daughter, our daughter, that you can actually go to the doctor and you can find out something's really wrong.
Right.
Because I think you build up a confidence. Like I've gone to the doctor all my life and I've never really heard anything where I went, oh, well, that's terrible. My gosh. Right. So you kind of go and you got to go, yeah, I'm sure I'm fine.
Right.
So when anxiety gets really bad, it pushes me into a different place. So that would be a trigger for sure. But the problem is
feeling anxious.
Yeah. And the problem is that, you can't avoid it, right? No one's going to teach me how to worry about my kids less.
Sure, yeah. So you have the two kids?
I have the two kids, yeah.
Yeah, married?
I am.
And how's your mental health impacted your marriage, your relationship?
I think I would boast that I think it's affected her less than it would most. It certainly affected her for sure. But I think one of the things about me that may actually be conspiring against me in terms of depression is that I'm a pleaser. I always worry about what they're feeling. Are they happy? Are they enjoying their day? I'm having dinner with someone. Is their day better because they had dinner with me? How can I give people more? So I think I've done a pretty good job of hiding my illness because I'm wired to do that.
Right.
Plus, I'm a professional hider. That's what you do when you talk on television.
Right. I mean, you're essentially an actor in some respects, right?
You are. I mean, Lisa LaFlamme. Lisa LaFlamme does CTV News every night at 11 p.m. I'm not talking about her from a mental health standpoint because as far as I know, she's mentally healthy. But she's the same every night.
Right.
Yet her day could not be the same. There's got to be some times when she comes to work and she goes, I'm so worried about my mom or my dad. But she presents herself in the same way because when you work on television or on radio, you show people not what you're feeling, but you show them what you think they want to see or hear.
Right. The character. That's what people are expecting.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like, I'm telling you a story about the Maple Leafs victory last night. When you present information to people, you don't make yourself and your mood and your happiness level part of the story, right? Like you would be really weird to go, well, the Leafs won last night in a key game, but I was feeling kind of crappy. So, and then you go through the whole, in the voice of the crappy feeling. That's not what you do. So I think I was uniquely suited, or at least well suited, to be the person to be able to fool everybody else.
So this is really interesting. So do you think that played a role in your struggle itself, feeling like you were wearing this mask all the time and then needing to break out of that?
I think what played a role, even if you go back a little bit more, was the need to keep people happy around me. Because there's a lot of pressure in that, right?
What was, I don't mean to go too
you can ask me
psychoanalytic on you.
You can go, you know what?
On the couch with Mark Henick.
Normally I'd pay $250 an hour for that. So
well, I'm going to ask, so that people-pleasing thing, the mask-wearing thing, the hiding thing, what was the relationship like between your parents?
My parents had the greatest marriage in history.
What does that mean?
They adored each other, right? They were. My parents are both still alive. My mom unfortunately has Alzheimer's, which I kind of use when I speak. Sometimes I say, you want to know the difference between depression and sadness? My mom has Alzheimer's. That makes me sad, but it doesn't make me depressed. Right. But my parents, I came from the most loving home in the world. I have one brother, and we were just such an incredibly close family. Now there's a story to be told about that. My brother, who is a brilliant nephrologist, he's a kidney doctor, head of all of transplantation in British Columbia, became an addict at a young age, self-medicating. So he was an alcoholic. He was a drug addict, addicted to prescription pills. And especially when he started drinking at 16, I saw that and I thought, okay, well, my parents are really upset about this because they had no idea he's self-medicating, right? So, but he was such a genius that he could still get the highest mark in Ontario when he was in grade 13. Like the highest mark. Who does that?
Right.
And then he got a scholarship to medical school, all as an addict, all as an alcoholic. Wow. So I think I saw the pain that was causing my parents, and I said, and never consciously, but I think I made a decision, never give them trouble. Right. Never show them a reason to be upset because they have enough reasons to be upset from the other guy.
Yeah, the good boy. Whose of your parents, whose attention did you crave more?
Never, either one.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, given the fact that this conversation is all candid, right? So it's not like I'm coming in here with an agenda. No. So when I tell you, I never thought about that for a second. And when I look back, I couldn't pick.
Right.
I could not. There's not a chance I could tell you, well, it's my mother or my father.
Are they both? Because you and your brother very successful. Were they?
My dad was an orthodontist, and
Okay.
my mom ran his office. I came from. People say, well, why are you so capable
Right.
of talking about this mental illness that you have, where you don't appear to be affected by the stigma?
Right.
And because I give a lot of speeches twice a week, and someone will put up their hand always and say, hey, I just want to say thank you for doing this, and you're so courageous. And I'll go, well, wait a second here. You're measuring my courage by your own standard, right? Because the idea of being up on this stage talking about your mental health challenge, if you have one, is really frightening for you. But don't make the assumption that it's frightening for me, because it never was.
Right.
It's never taken 1 ounce of strength to get up and do that. Not strength isn't the right word. 1 ounce of courage. None whatsoever. I mean, there's no courage if there's no fear, right?
Right.
No one rides in the elevator, gets out of the elevator and goes, oh my God, that was so courageous. And someone says, well, do you have a fear of elevators? No. It doesn't make any sense. I have a fear of elevators, right? So if I ride in a big office building and I'm able to continue to carry on a conversation with the person around me, I think, well, it's pretty courageous of me, but not this. So I think one of the reasons why I'm capable of doing that is the love that I got from my parents.
Why do you think you have never been afraid of this? I mean, even back in '98 when you first recognized you
never
struggled.
cared. I don't know. But I think part of it is I always felt loved and supported.
Yeah.
And because, I came from a home where I could have been measured against my genius brother.
Right.
But I never was. When I told my parents that I wanted to be a broadcaster, they said, great. And when I started to go to Ryerson, everything I did, they thought it was the greatest thing. I did 3,800 off the records. I did 5,000 sports desks. I worked at CHFI before that, so I did news on the weekend.
Right.
I did sports at CFRB when I was in school. I would say of all of that, 99% my parents either watched or listened to.
Yeah.
So I think when you feel that kind of support, it allows you to expose yourself in a way that you don't fear what others are going to think, because you know what? I'm loved.
Yeah. What was driving you to be so ambitious? Where was the fire coming
Failure.
from? A fear of failure.
Repeated failure. So here I was, a guy in high school, shy.
I find that hard to believe. Shy.
Yeah. Shy at school. At home, I was a
Right.
different guy. Like at home, it was like, it bothered me
Interesting.
a lot.
Because you feel safe at home, though, right?
I guess that's why. But at home, I could be there and I could make people laugh. But at school, I wasn't trying to make anyone laugh because I was too nervous to talk. So here I was at school, making it through high school, with reasonably good marks. When I have conversations with my brother, who's a genius, no one would listen to the conversation and go, wow, he's way smarter than you. It's just I figured out one day, actually, I said, Dave, I get it now. I understand why you can do what you did, and I could never do that. And it's because you can learn stuff you're not interested in. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, to be a doctor, how much, of it that you have to learn, whether it's histology or anatomy or all of these building blocks or, all the biology and chemistry that you have to learn. He goes, oh, most of it's boring as hell. I go, well, I can't learn that no matter how hard I try. But because you knew that this was a means to an end. So here I am. I'm fine in high school. I go to University of Toronto because everybody I knew went there. My brother had gone through there. All my buddies did. And they all wanted to be dentists or doctors or lawyers or accountants or engineers or something like that. I only went because I had to go somewhere. I couldn't just say, well, I'm done school now. Right. So I followed.
Why not?
I had no idea what that would mean. I never met anyone, for instance, who didn't go to post-secondary school.
Right.
But it was like everything I saw in my life said, well, you have to go to university.
Right.
And here I am at university, just wandering, just looking for a course that I could pass. And those were hard to find. So here I am, second year, I get put on probation at U of T. And I'm lost, right? Because there's nothing in this world for me. There's nothing that is mine. Like my one of my buddies was studying for the LSATs, and another buddy was doing this. I had nothing. The only thing I ever really wanted to do was to talk about sports on television or on radio. But I thought, can't do that. How are you going to get a job? It's like saying I want to be an actor. Right. Also, because the community I came from, there were no role models. Nobody I knew went into television or radio. So here I am now in third year, and I'm going to park my mom's Mustang around U of T. And I remember this because it's raining, and I'm going to Parallel Park. And I remember saying, excuse me, but Fuck it. This is what I said. I said, fuck it. I'm out of here. I'm not going to take this exam because I know I'm going to fail. I said, but the next day I promised myself I'm going to go into U of T radio and try, like maybe there's something there for me. So the next day I go into U of T radio, and, U of T radio wasn't exactly, the highest standard. So if you walked in, you could be on the air 30 seconds later. Right. So I remember pushing a button, and the red light went on the button. And I started talking, and I thought, wow, I found a home. This is me. Like, finally, I understood how people are driven to do things, right? It's like, man, I really want this. I want to be good at this. I want to do this. And it was this awakening. So you asked me, how I ended up doing this. The answer is because I had nothing else. And my greatest asset was no safety net, no second choice, no other place to go. Like if I fail in broadcasting, I couldn't go in my dad's business. My dad was an orthodontist.
Right. So what did pressing that button, seeing that light, what did that do for you? What did that give you?
Oh, it gave me a feeling of self-esteem that I'd never had before.
Why?
Because I could be good at something. Like I knew this is something for me. The only thing I was really good at in the past was being a sports fan, right? Like I could remember things, I could make arguments. I was, it sounds funny to say I was good at being a fan, but I was good at being a sports fan. Yet most other things, I was never the best in the room at it. I never felt like I had something to offer. But now all of a sudden, with this red light on and me talking about something, it's like, wow, this is really like I want this. I like this. I feel good about myself.
Did you ever have aspiration, why talk about sports? Why not do sports?
Yeah, I mean, that pretty limiting, right? Like there was nothing that I could have been that good at. Like the things that I was best at, I wasn't going to make a living from, right? So I was always better at watching than doing.
So what kind of feedback did you get from those very early days of people listening to you?
Well, most of the feedback I got was either from my girlfriend, who was my wife, or my parents.
You met in college?
Her brother was my best friend in high school. Nice. So she was 3 years behind. So I knew her family. I went into her house a lot. I hung out with her family. The people that heard me at the time were largely my parents and my girlfriend. And what you find out is that they think everything you do is really good. But what I had better than an asset that was way more profound for me than it was for anybody that I went to school with. So I went to Ryerson after I failed out of U of T. Yes, I failed out. I got a letter from them, and it said, "You are no longer welcome at our school." But I had done a really smart thing, which is surprising for someone that's failing out of school. I had applied to Ryerson for radio and television.
Knowing that you were failing, or just because you needed?
Oh, knowing that I was failing, but also knowing that there was something I wanted to do.
Right. How did your parents take the failing out of U of T?
Well, I gave a speech. I don't know, this is probably like 15 years ago now, but I gave a speech. I got some kind of award, and my parents were there, and I told this story. My mom goes, "You never failed out of school." So I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "You didn't fail out of school." I go, "No, I failed out of school." She goes, "No, you didn't." I go, "Mom, who makes that shit up? Who walks around going, 'I failed,' when I didn't fail? Of course I failed." She goes, "Well, you never told us." I go, "Well, it wasn't necessarily relevant, right? Because I failed, but I lied, and I never told Ryerson that I was failing out of U of T. So I had made up the story that I'd never been to post-secondary school. So, because there's no way I was going to get in, right? Tough course to get into. You're not getting in with a 39 average. Right. So I went to Ryerson, and I knew this was my best advantage. First of all, no safety net, like no place to go. Like, so failure wasn't an option. But number two, I knew how bad I was. And yet all the guys in particular, it was like 15 of us, one woman, 14 guys, wanted to be sportscasters, right? They all thought they were great. And I knew that I sucked. And I knew they sucked worse than me because I was better than them. But they thought they were great. So I worked 1,000 times harder than them because I was convinced that I wasn't nearly good enough to make it, that I had to practice. So I was, while they were believing that life would unfold for them and give them great opportunities, I was practicing. I was working, and I had all this energy.
Even way back, I find that interesting. Even way back then, that you didn't think you were good enough.
But I was right. See, this was not sort of depression's voice in your head that says you're no good, even though you could be good. I mean, I know, like, broadcasting is really no different than playing a musical instrument. Right. You can't learn to play a musical instrument without practicing, and you can't learn to broadcast without practicing. I knew that. They thought, well, it's just talking. So that was, that was my big advantage.
Right, approaching it as a skill to be
as a skill.
Yeah.
I found this amazing voice teacher where my dad had a patient, and the patient had a speech impediment. And he said to my dad, said, "Oh, you sound like a lot better," or whatever. And he said, "Well, I've been going for voice lessons." And my dad said to him, "Oh, well, what's your teacher's name?" And he told him, and he said, "I wonder if he teaches broadcasting." And this patient of my dad said, "Yeah, I know he does, because the next person that comes in after me is a broadcaster." So my dad told me this. I called this guy Ken Lemaire. It was like I had seen my sensei. I had found this person who could make me better. Broadcasting is a really tough thing to teach.
Sure.
Like, there's a million employers out there who will tell you, you got to get better. And you say, well, tell me what I should do. I don't know, just get better. But this guy could make me better. So when I started on the air, I would call him during commercials. I would say, "Hey, what do you think?" And he'd say, "Oh, well, I didn't love how you said, good evening, everyone." He taught me this thing called the music of words, where you would use inflection to convey meaning, right? So first thing he said when I walked in the first time, he said, "What is this?" And he said, "This is my pen." He said, "If I say this is my pen, it means something different than this is my pen. And that means something different than this is my pen." And that stuck with me, obviously. So here I had the willingness to learn, the understanding that I needed to learn, and I had someone who could learn me.
Yeah. So you go to Ryerson for broadcast journalism, is it? And
radio and television.
Radio and television. Okay. So then straight to Bell CTV out of there?
I was lucky enough to get a job working at CFRB, so now News Talk 1010. Doing sports on the weekend. I also did traffic reports. I was the guy who said, "I'll do anything."
Did you do traffic with inflection?
I did traffic with inflection, including the inflection on the because I went in the CFRB Twin Comanche. Because I was doing commuter traffic, right? Which is, the young subway line. There's a problem at College Street. Better to avoid that. Also, there's an accident at Bathurst and Eglinton, on alternate routes. So that was just in the studio talking about that. The guy who was doing traffic, who was back in the time, was very famous. His name was Henry Shannon. I'm Henry Shannon in the CFRB Twin Comanche. And back in those days, CFRB was by far the most successful radio station on the planet. They had a bigger share of the market in Toronto than anyone could have ever dreamed of. They had these celebrities that were on the air, like Betty Kennedy and Gordon Sinclair and all of these people who were legends. But the problem they had was that their audience all got older and died, and they hadn't rejuvenated that. So they said, "Hey, do you want to go up and train for traffic?" And I said, "Sure." Well, you get up in the CFRB Twin Comanche, everything's great. Go into the clouds, not the same as being in a 747. So I puked. And I remember saying at the time, "I'm never going to tell anyone this." But here we are this time later.
Here we are. There's the scoop.
Oh, my God.
Michael Landsberg puked in the clouds.
Yeah. It's so humiliating. Oh, my God. Because he's turning around. He's going, "You can see the 401 westbound down there at the Allen Expressway." Because it's hard.
Sure.
If you're in a plane, you're doing traffic, it's really hard if you go in the clouds and come out of the clouds to know where the hell you are.
Right.
Like, how do you know? Because if you just follow it across, if you're going along the 401 and you know that there's the Allen and then there's Dufferin and then there's Keele, like it's easy to follow it.
Sure.
Not so easy when you go in the clouds.
No,
that was the end of my traffic career.
So I was going to say, so how long did that last? Not very long.
Never went back up.
Never went.
When I graduated, I had a demo tape, which was great. A demo tape that wasn't just made up in a studio, but this is me on the air, which is a huge thing, right?
But actually, so on that then, while you're doing traffic, while you're doing all these other things, do you feel like it's not right for you because you should be doing sports?
No, because broadcasting is broadcasting.
Okay.
So I knew that anything I did was going to make me better, whether I was saying, the 401 westbound is really bad right now, or if I was saying the Blue Jays look for their 7th straight victory. I knew that it's the same skill.
Right.
But my goal clearly was that. And eventually I got to do weekend sports at CFRB. And Dave Hodge had been my hero. So they had this segment that when I was a kid, I always listened to. So here I was. I knew that at 11:20 at night, CFRB had a show from 11 to 11:30 called The World Tonight. So they used to say, "The World Tonight takes a late look at sports. Here's Dave Hodge." And he would say, "Thank you, Bob. Good evening, everyone. Our sports report is brought to you tonight by Chrysler Canada Limited for your nearby Dodge and Plymouth dealers." And then he would go into his sportscast. Well, a couple of years later, I got to do that, including reading that tagline that I just said. And I thought, this is like the greatest thing that's ever going to happen to me.
Right. Yeah.
So eventually I got to do sports, graduated, was able to send out a demo tape, got a job at CHFI doing weekend news, which was like, Are you kidding me? Someone's going to let me do news?
Right.
Oh, my God. Like, I had never read the front page of the paper. Back then, I only knew sports. But you don't tell that when they offer you a job in Toronto.
Sure.
You don't go, well, I'm not really qualified for this.
Yeah.
Bluff, bluff,
Like
bluff.
Auditions for actors. Hey, do you speak Spanish? Sure.
Sure, absolutely.
I'll figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. Do you want to do traffic? Sure. Do you want to go in the CFRB Twin Comanche? Sure. Do you want to go back? Nope. I did that, and I did interviews for a show called Chronicle, which was their noontime show, and I loved it. And then TSN started, and now there I did not have a demo tape, so I went to local cable station. It was McLean Hunter. They did community television, which is about the lowest form of life on the on the food chain of television.
Yeah.
Community television is the lowest. So I actually did a talk show there. I did a 90-minute talk show called Time Out. We used to take phone calls. We used to take 2 an hour, 3 an hour. I learned how to ad-lib. If you're looking into a camera for 90 minutes and you get only 3 phone calls, you learn how to ad-lib.
Sure.
So when TSN was starting, I made this demo tape up there and sent it in, thinking there's no chance I'm getting the job, right? Like, why would they hire me? I've never worked in television.
Right. Now, did you know what you wanted to do for them? Was it something that existed and you wanted to build it?
I mean, I think the answer to that is I didn't know what they were going to be.
Right.
I assumed the vice president of programming called me up and said, why should I possibly give you an audition? He goes, you know what? Your demo tape was okay. It was pretty good. But I'm only going to audition 8 people. Why should I audition you? And I said to him, well, don't assume, and I remember saying this, don't assume because I haven't done it that I can't do it. Give me a shot. And if it's shitty, then send me on my way and I'll never bug you again. But to make the assumption because I haven't done it means that I can't, I think that's pretty narrow.
Right.
He said, okay, I got the job.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is Landsberg history.
So then how long does it take, I guess, from this growth mindset of always wanting to learn, everything being an opportunity, incorporating it all in and growing and
it's a good way to look. It's a good description.
Well, yeah, but then at some point, it sounds like when you're at TSN, it started to fall apart, right?
Yeah, I mean, not professionally, because here I am, like on one side, one half of me, the professional side. I mean, I looked at it as a great gift, but it was kind of from TSN standpoint, they had never done anything at 6 p.m. at night. So when they said, "Oh, we want you to create a talk show and host it at 6 p.m.," they weren't risking anything.
Right.
I was risking something because I had done Sports Desk for the previous 5 years at 11 p.m. So I gave that up for this talk show, which didn't exist, and especially in 1997. There was nothing out there, right? So they thought, we probably can't lose, and then all of a sudden it became a hit.
Well, and you were already a bit of a name at least.
Yes,
yeah.
And that gave me credibility with guests, right?
Sure.
We'll go, hey, I watch you on Sports Desk.
Yeah.
So the show immediately became a hit, not necessarily in a large part due to me, but my the producer at the time was a guy named Bob Makowitz, who became like my best friend, and he was brilliant. He didn't even love sports. He was a musician. He was a pop culture guy. He was one of the smartest guys I ever met. So here you have this talk show, which if you put it in other people's hands would have been really predictable. But in his hands, it was all about, we created this thing, the social, moral, and political issues that stem from sports. So it was pretty brilliant. And again, I'm boasting about somebody else's work largely. It was pretty brilliant because everybody's interested in social issues and political issues. So you could put an American singer, like we had Pink on the show. Pink had, you couldn't possibly talk to her about hockey. Right. Like, what would she know about hockey, right? But you could talk to her about a hockey player fighting another hockey player, knocking him unconscious, and the police coming and arresting him. Like, you could talk about that.
Right.
So it was actually a really brilliant move because I met everybody imaginable. Like, I could sit here, honestly, for 10 hours. You may not want to sit here for 10 hours, but I could tell you 10 hours worth of stories of famous people that I got to meet only because I got to host this show.
And what did you learn about famous people in general? If there
I
is
think what I learned how to be a really good judge of people. I learned how to really draw things out of people, which makes me well suited for the conversation with the depressed person who is very unsure of his or herself, who has a big, difficult time making conversation. Right. I'm a professional small talker, right? That's what you do. So it's like, I mean, I don't think I've ever actually thought about it the way I'm telling you now, that ability that I was force-fed, right? You could not learn how to be a good small talker by doing 5 shows a week, 210 shows a year for 18 years.
With the stakes being that high, too, that you don't want to lose that.
Right. How do I, Mark, you're a guest on the show. How do I get the most out of you? And the answer isn't always to be nice to you. Sometimes it's to show you're an American guest, you're kind of cocky. I come across as more cocky than you, so you think, wow, I got to match this guy. I got to be at my best because, he's gonna walk over me, right? So you would show that. Or if someone was nervous, you'd show a different side of you, which was, hey, I got your back. No matter what happens on this show, you will not be embarrassed. You will not make a fool of yourself. I have got your back. So I think I learned how to make people comfortable, and that now pays off for me.
It sounds like achieve everything that you had been aspiring to, working toward, wanting to be a sportscaster almost all your life.
Yes.
You get it, but then you're not happy.
Right. But I never attached what's happening in my life with this unhappiness.
Right.
Because I always perceived it as this chemical imbalance that hit me like bacteria hits people.
Right.
Like where I never looked at it and thought, well, something missing here for my life. I never thought that for a second.
Can you trace it, though, to when you first had that experience that something isn't right?
I think on one level I was paying attention to it, but it wasn't the most conscious level. Right. Meaning I kind of knew, wow, this is like everything's hard now.
Right.
But I didn't sit and sort of take inventory of what that meant. Sure. I didn't sit back and go, well, what does this all mean? I just kind of lived with the misery as if it was something that had just become a part of me.
How deep into it did you get before you finally did?
Probably 6 months, 7 months.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's...
sooner than most.
Yes, well, a lot sooner than most, actually. And you had the benefit, too, and I don't know if you've reflected on this or not, but, I mean, you're Michael fucking Landsberg. You can go to a doctor and get the treatment that you need and act on it, and right?
I think I may have used that little phrase on the phone when I called the doc. Michael fucking Landsberg. But one of the things I do all the time when I speak about this, and whether it's actually on stage or whether I'm tweeting it or whether I'm doing it in a video blog that I do every day, I say all the time, look, none of this is easy, and I fully acknowledge that your station in life, it can't fix your depression. It can't prevent you from being depressed, which we talk about all the time, right? Depression doesn't discriminate. Well, you know what? Big fucking surprise. Of course it doesn't discriminate. Right. But people associate like money with happiness, and how can someone with money who's happy become not happy? That doesn't make sense to people. The point is that it's not about your station in life. It's not about the things around you. Not to suggest that a lot of bad things happening to you can't change your brain chemistry. Right. But it was, so it was for me, total acknowledgement. Like if you and I were talking about your struggles, and I was saying, look, I understand how hard this is. So I had everything going for me. I had a stable job. I had the ability to do my job without necessarily taking time off from my job. I had an employer that was supportive of me, although I didn't really need much. I had the ability, I had a family doctor. I could afford medication. I was able to talk my way into a psychiatrist's office. So I had all of the benefits that not a lot of people have, right? And I say to people all the time, look, I'm not saying this is easy, and I'm not saying that I could do what I'm asking you to do, but you need, for instance, you need to share this with your spouse. You need to share this with your employer. And I can't use myself as an example and say, see, I did it because it was easier for me. Right.
Do you find that there's a tension between telling people that the chemical imbalance thing, which, doesn't actually have a whole lot of science behind it, or at least the science has kind of fallen apart over the last few years, that it's not quite that simple. But do you find that there's a tension between telling people that they're sick or that they're broken, or that this is just the way that they are, and then trying to inspire them to be otherwise, to fight for their happiness, I believe is something that you've been saying, Yeah. How do you counter the argument, well, what's the point of fighting if this is just the way I am?
Right, but I never tell people that's just the way you are. That's the opposite of what I say. You mentioned two things. One of them was you're sick. Well, it's pretty easy to tell someone with cancer who finds out they have cancer that you got to fight, right? You're sick, you got to fight. Sure. You know what? There's and the analogies between depression, for instance, and cancer are pretty good. There's a lot more similarities than people would be led to believe, or maybe would put together on their own. And one of them is, suicide will always exist. this. We're never going to get rid of every suicide. There's so many different reasons for it. Maybe we will one day. Let me rephrase that. I don't believe that there's one way to stop people from taking their lives.
Sure.
That it's way more complicated than that. Yeah. So what I tell people is they go, well, what's the point? I go, well, hey, understand, people still go for cancer treatment even though they might find out they only have a 50% chance of surviving, right?
Right.
People die from cancer even though they try to get better. People die from depression, even though they try to get better.
Right.
I think at the heart of the stigma is the fact that there is no real physical proof right now that we're sick. So I can't show you an X-ray. I can't show you an MRI, an ultrasound, a biopsy, a blood test. I can't show you any of that, right? But if I had cancer, I could, right? So I could say to you, look right there on that. That's my tumor. That's the enemy. That's what I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight to beat that thing. It's a lot harder to get people to buy into this.
Sure, but and I guess this is kind of the heart of the question is sure, you can see that picture of that tumor, but it doesn't matter. How do you counter the argument? It doesn't matter that you're going to fight it. It's a tumor. That's where I don't necessarily always like the too close of an analogy with cancer, because depression isn't necessarily that tumor that needs to kill you because that's the way that tumor is going to grow, right? That we're some form of cancer that is untreatable, for example. I don't know. I have a hard time accepting that depression is like that there's...
Well, how do you perceive it? See, I don't perceive depression. I mean, the analogy to cancer, I kind of stand by in that
sure.
It's more like a blood cancer, right? You
right.
know, like there's no physical monument in your head that is this illness, that if you remove that, then the illness will be gone.
Well, no, I'll tell you where my discomfort comes from it. In the debate, I don't know if I didn't notice if you had an opinion on this or not, but the debate around medical assistance in dying for people with mental illnesses, it's something that I opposed. I don't believe that recovery is impossible for some people. Mm-hmm. I believe that recovery we haven't figured out how or why or how to get there yet, or what works for that individual person. But I believe that everybody can recover in some way or another. However, I think probably maybe the majority of people believe that you just can't recover sometimes, and that maybe having a doctor assist you in dying is the best way out. Where do you stand on that? Is recovery available to everybody?
I think potential recovery is available.
Right.
I don't believe that we have 100 people in the room and they all suffer from severe depression. I don't believe that 100 people will find relief enough where they can say, hey, you know what? I'm like Stéphane Richer said that I'm enjoying my life. Mm. I don't believe that we can get those 100 people to the point where they can say I'm enjoying my life. Mm. But the thing is, we don't know which of the 100 can't get there.
Right.
So the battle is worth fighting. If you knew in advance, okay, well, you 10, I'm sorry, you 10, you guys are fucked because you're not going to get any better.
Right.
Then like what would be the impetus for them to stay alive?
Right.
But I think there's always the hope. And this is a speech that I give to people, like face to face. I say, look, I've talked or tried to talk people from taking their lives by saying, look, you can kill yourself in the future if you try the things that are out there that could make you better.
Right.
And you try them all, meaning like you try all the medications, you try ECT, you try deep brain stimulation, you try all of the things have helped other people. And you go, you know what? I'm just out of gas. I just can't do it anymore. Then, I can't tell you, I can't give you the same argument to keep fighting.
Well, and this is the thing that I find, too, that the blinders that depression puts on you, that hole that it puts you in, that it blocks everything else out. One of the most common things that I hear from people are struggling is, I've tried everything. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's go through that. Let's process that a bit. Tell me about what you've tried. 99% of the time, it sounds like they've been bounced around in a system that doesn't work.
Yes.
That they've been subjected to therapists who didn't care, who didn't connect with them, medications that weren't monitored, whatever. They've been bounced around, and that's not their fault. But as a result, they feel like that there's nothing left.
The sense of hopelessness, it comes with the illness, right? It's all this negativity. I mean, you've spoken about it, about, the illness talks to you, and the illness has a voice, right? And one of the things the voice says is, you're never getting better, right? This is, man, you are fucked, because as sick as you feel now, you're going to be that way tomorrow. Dad, you know what? All those things you try, they're not going to do anything. It's all bogus, and you get so negative.
Yeah.
And there's so many things that add up to that sense of hopelessness. One of them is the system that you mentioned, right?
Right.
Mental illness as far as I'm concerned, it's like it's 1962 when it comes to mental illness. Yet when it comes to cardiology, it's 2018, right? When it comes to oncology, it's 2018. But when it comes to psychology, it's 1962.
Yeah. Now, I got myself in trouble with the Sick Not Weak community a while back ago because I made this inartful analogy to getting out of bed in the morning. I've felt for more than half my life when I wake up in the morning that I can't drag myself out of bed in the morning. Mm-hmm. That's a classic, I think, symptom of depression.
Classic.
And maybe it's just because it's what's kept me alive for so many years, I can't let myself believe that I'm not physically able to. Anhedonia, one of the most common symptoms of depression as well, it affects your desire to do things, your motivation, there's nothing, depression doesn't break your legs on you, but it sure feels that way, right?
Yeah.
So, but reminding myself of that is almost my own self-critical way of saying, okay, I'm going to drag myself out of bed anyway, even though my mind is telling me that I can't, that I'm not able to. Mm-hmm. I am able to, but my brain is telling me that I can't. Mm-hmm. So I think people fall into, and I've done it, I've believed the lies too, where you believe that you're not able to, and then you adopt a disability mindset. Right?
I don't disagree with any of that.
Right, but I feel like that's controversial.
It may be. I mean, that to me, there's no such thing as, like, I just go with what I know because I felt it, right? Just like you have, right? So whatever you have felt and experienced is correct. You can't, like, no one should say to you, well, that's wrong. But here's what I want to say is that you have to be careful not to suggest that other people should be, in this case, as strong as you are.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I never, like, sometimes I even hide it. I never say, you know what? 2007, 2008, 375 TV shows. I never missed one. Yeah. I hated every single second of it, but I never missed it. I don't want to tell people that because they may not be able to match that standard.
Right.
And like you, I found a way to combat it by saying, I have no choice. I have to get out of bed. It didn't make me better, but it made me productive. It kept my career going. It kept food on the table for my family.
Sure. This is a really good point because I think I've certainly fallen victim to this. I've discussed this with other advocates as well, falling in accidentally often to this mindset that I recovered, why can't you? Well, their life is different. Yeah. Their circumstances are different. God knows what they've been through, right?
And I'm so careful not to say it. See, I can say it to you, but I would never refer to it about myself. I never say to people, hey, I'm strong, right? Mm. Well, I do say I'm strong because I try to encourage them to believe that you can be, you can have depression and still be strong, that it's not a reflection of your weakness.
Yeah. But
I'm really careful not to sort of hold myself out as an example and say, see, I did it. You can do it too,
right?
Because there's lots of things that this group of people, however many there are, that I might speak to, who haven't been able to go on with their lives the same way I could.
Right.
They have other assets that I wouldn't have, right?
And that's kind of the trick of it too, right? Is that it doesn't mean that they're not strong, because I think they are. Just because they're struggling, sure, they might not be in the same place as you or as me, or at our best anyway. But that doesn't mean that they can't get there. They just don't believe that they can.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that the illness speaks to us in such a negative way that we can't distinguish the reality of our capabilities from what we believe are our capabilities.
Right. Well, and I try to check my recovery privilege, I guess we can call it, by trying to think back to being a 15-year-old kid on the edge of a bridge ready to kill myself and thinking, I wouldn't believe me today.
Right.
If I could go back and talk to that kid, I wouldn't believe that I could ever do everything that I've done.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's in being an advocate, and I've never really found a good word for what it is you and I both do. Very difficult to not sound preachy.
Yeah.
Because this is not a religious thing. Yeah. It's very difficult not to sound like, hey, look at me. I did it, so you can do it. Because that's very dangerous to say, I did it, so you can do it. Yeah. And you never underestimate the power of the brain to convince you that you can't do things. I mean, like, there's people that have paralysis, right? That has been induced by, like, a hypnotist can convince you that you can't walk, right? Even though you can walk, right? Your legs are fine. There's all kinds of illnesses, psychosomatic illnesses, where you have the belief that you're coughing all the time. Oh, there's something there, but there's nothing there.
Right.
So the brain can control us, and one of the challenges that you and I have is to try to convince people that they can gain a measure of control over their own brains.
And sometimes I think, at least in my case, trying to make sure that you convince yourself too. Those who can't do teach, as they say sometimes. So
it's true.
Maybe sometimes if you yell it loud enough, you'll believe it yourself.
No doubt. I mean, I often will, especially if I'm giving a speech to an audience and someone stands up and says something really nice, I often say, well, thank you. And that's true. Like, I'm not going to deny for a second that me going to Fergus, Ontario, a town that I'd never heard of, and speaking to 1,000 kids in the high school after this community, Fergus Elora, had 27 suicides in 11 months. Like that's like beyond statistically, it should be impossible, right? So I'm not going to say that getting in front of students and then the OPP and then the community at large, that doing that isn't a good thing. Of course it's a good thing. I'm not going to get up there and say, well, like, hey, I'm not doing anything good. Of course I am. But it's very easy for me to do. And the impact is way greater than the effort that's needed. So I'm always quick to point out, I'm giving, but I'm taking too.
Right.
You may not know it, but I'm you, right? I'm a patient. I'm someone that struggles. I struggle with self-esteem. I struggle with all of the same things you do. So by coming out and giving this speech to this community, I feel better about myself, and I hear myself speaking, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm listening to me right now, and I can inspire myself by my own words.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, there's something to be said about the speaking environment and the stage. You know where your stage line is. You know where your levels are. You know where your lights are. There's a lot of control involved in that. You're in complete control of how you tell your story. I
am, except on those days. I showed you the marks on my arm from the bad days. God, I live in fear of getting on stage on a bad day. It's happened to me a few times where I've texted my daughter saying, oh my God, I'm going to be terrible. And she'll message me and go, no, you're not. And I'll say, yeah, I have nothing. And she goes, you may feel that way, but they will not see that in you. So I can on a bad day be a totally different person. Like, very often when I go to get introduced at a speech, I'll walk up while the guy's introducing me or the woman's introducing me and say, hey, I got this. Okay. You know what? I got to get going on this, right? No one needs to hear about my career because, to be honest with you, if my message isn't good, that's not going to save me. But I want to talk, so get out of my way. And then there's the days when I'm struggling, when I'm going, oh God, please keep going. Don't call me up on the stage. Oh man, how long do I have to be up there for? I can become two different people.
Fake it till you make it in some ways. And I guess
fake it until you go home.
Fake it till you go home. And then
until I get to go home.
Yeah, get under your covers and do whatever you do to take care of yourself. Yeah. So what do you recommend to people who aren't as far along in this, who don't have that kind of theatrical skill, all of those kinds of coping mechanisms? What do you tell people who are just starting out on this journey into mental illness?
Well, there's a couple of building blocks for recovery. And one of them is educating yourself and understanding. Like, there's something totally empowering about learning about your illness if you suffer from depression. First of all, most people come to it believing the stigma. They believe that somehow this is a self-inflicted wound. Somehow they have let themselves down and allowed this illness to. It's like if I get a cold and I go, well, man, I was around all those sick people and I didn't wash my hands. How did I let this happen to me? I mean, that's a realistic thing to say when it comes to getting a cold, right? We know if we wash our hands, especially when we're touching things that other people with colds have, that we can maybe prevent it. So I think that people, when they realize that something's wrong, they blame themselves, their first instinct. And when you research this, Google's depression and you get 100 million hits, there's a pretty good chance that, there's a lot of people out there that have this, that this is not a make-believe illness. The more you learn about it, I think the more empowered you are. The more you learn about treatments, the less you are beholden to your doctor, for instance. If you go to your doctor and say, Doc, I have depression, your doctor talks to you and says, yep, you got a problem, and you don't know anything about the treatments for your illness, you're just sitting there saying, okay, tell me what to do, Doc. And that's really dangerous because this is not like going to a surgeon for atherosclerosis where, you've got a blocked artery, right? Yeah. Surgeon's going to fix that. There's a million different ways to treat depression.
And actually most family docs don't even know all of the different options themselves. That's not their training.
So when I go to, exactly. Well, I spoke at St. Joseph's in Hamilton, and I was on stage with a family doctor, and he had an interest in psychiatry, right? And he said, the stigma is at its worst in a family doctor's office.
Oh, for sure.
Because family doctors don't see a mental health situation as a crisis the way they do something they can quantify. Oh, my God, your blood pressure is through the roof. I got to get you in to see a cardiologist tomorrow. Yeah. They don't say that when you go, oh, my God, you have not experienced joy in a year.
Right. Your
terrible.
Beck depression inventory is through the floor.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh, we got to get you in to see someone. The sense of urgency isn't there. Yeah. And that's tragic. The system is tragic. The system is not even just flawed. It kind of doesn't exist.
But, I think that different routes to recovery work for different people. I mean, for me, it happens to be medication and psychotherapy and finding something to be passionate about. For others, it might be something different. And I think you only really figure that out. Nobody's going to do recovery to you or for you, right? You only figure that out on your own.
If you don't fight for your happiness, who can, who will? Really. You can ask people to help you,
sure,
but they can't do it for you. And one of the reasons why I word it that way, fight for your happiness, the key word is fight. Mm-hmm. I'm not telling you how to fight. I'm telling you that you must decide, if you're miserable enough, that you will do anything to get better. You will try anything that's approved, right?
Sure.
Because there's a pretty good chance that the first 5 things you try maybe won't work for you. And what worked for you, Mark, it did work for me, the same sorts of things. But for somebody else, maybe there's a simpler way to do it. Maybe they don't have to go on medication. Sure. But if you don't accept the fight, then you're not getting where you want to go, because chances are you're going to hit a roadblock where you're going to go, oh, well, that's a failure. And if you're not saying, okay, well, the fight continues, may as well quit now.
Yeah. Michael Landsberg?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh, this is great. This is fun. And you know that I should say that I'm a fan of yours. I heard you speak. I've heard you speak a few times. But when I've been in the audience and you've spoke, I've gone back, and this daughter that I was talking about, Casey, I've said to her, this guy's good.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
It's truth. And you got a good beard.
Thanks. All right. That was Michael Landsberg, TSN legend. I love talking to him so much, especially about near the end there. You heard me talking to him about the interaction that I had with the Sick Not Weak community. What I was talking about there was a tweet that I had sent out in which I said that, I said it was inartful. What I actually said in the tweet was that depression is a disease of desire. And what I meant by that, it was taken the wrong way for sure. What I meant by that originally was that depression is the type of disease that attacks your desire. It attacks the parts of your brain that make you want to do things. And I really liked being able to clarify that with Michael and to be able to hear that he gets that yeah, when you're in bed and you're stuck in bed and you feel like you can't get out, it doesn't mean that depression has broken the bones of your legs, but it feels that way. Your brain believes that to be the case. So I really like being able to, Twitter's not the place for nuance, but I liked being able to articulate that a bit more clearly here. And he was so gracious, and I love being able to have that conversation. So I hope that you enjoyed it too. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter or Facebook at Mark Henick, at MarkHenick. You can also get more information on the show at markhenick.com/so-called-normal. Don't forget as well, one more job for you. Go on and subscribe and rate the show. Let me know what you thought. I really hope to hear more from you. We're going to be back next week with an all-new guest, lots of new stories, redefining what we all think of as our so-called normal. Thanks so much.